Once upon a time, in a quiet town, there lived a humble shoemaker and his kind-hearted wife. The shoemaker was an honest man who worked tirelessly, but times were hard, and he grew poorer each day. Despite his skill, few people came to buy shoes, and soon he had just enough leather left to make one final pair. One cold evening, as the wind howled outside, the shoemaker sighed and carefully cut the last piece of leather. "I will rise early in the morning and stitch these shoes," he said to his wife. They had no food for supper, but they comforted each other, trusting that tomorrow might bring better fortune. That night, with the leather neatly laid out on the workbench, the shoemaker and his wife went to bed. The next morning, the shoemaker awoke early, determined to finish his work. But when he stepped into his workshop, he gasped in surprise. There on the table stood the most exquisite pair of shoes he had ever seen. The stitches were flawless, the leather shone. He examined them closely, trying to understand how this miracle had happened. Before he could think much about it, a wealthy customer entered the shop. Seeing the fine shoes, he immediately offered a high price for them. With the money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. That evening, he cut the leather as before, laying it out carefully, and went to bed. The next morning, to his astonishment, 2 new pairs of shoes stood on his workbench, even more beautiful than the first. Again, customers came, delighted by the craftsmanship, and paid generously. Day after day, the same thing happened. The shoemaker would leave out the leather, and by dawn, perfect shoes would be waiting for him. His business flourished. Soon he and his wife were no longer struggling. They had more than enough to live comfortably. But curiosity filled their hearts. Who was this mysterious helper? One evening, the shoemaker turned to his wife and said, "We must discover who is helping us." So they hid behind a curtain, watching the workbench. At the stroke of midnight, the door creaked open, and 3 tiny figures slipped inside. The shoemaker and his wife could hardly believe their eyes. 3 little elves, no taller than a hand, leaped onto the workbench. They were dressed in ragged clothes. They stitched and shaped the leather, creating perfect shoes in no time at all. Their work finished, the elves danced happily before disappearing into the night. The shoemaker and his wife surprised. "The poor little things have been helping us all this time, and they don't even have proper clothes to wear," she said. "We must repay them for their kindness," the shoemaker agreed. That evening, they sewed tiny coats, small pairs of trousers, and little hats. That night, they laid out the tiny clothes and shoes, then hid once more behind the curtain. At midnight, the elves arrived as usual. They leaped onto the table, ready to work. But instead of leather, they found the beautiful clothes. At first, they were puzzled. Then they laughed and clapped their hands in delight. Quickly, they dressed in their new clothes, admiring themselves from head to toe. "We are free! We are free!" they sang joyfully. Then, giggling and twirling, they skipped out the door and into the night, never to return. The shoemaker and his wife never suffered from hardship again. With the prosperity the elves had brought them, They continued to make beautiful shoes and lived happily for the rest of their days.